My name is Natalia Whitfield, and I still don't forget that moment when my husband Greg's voice on the phone was as calm as if he were reminding me to grab milk on the way home. "I've blocked your credit card," he said. For a moment I thought maybe I'd heard wrong. "What?" "I've blocked your card," he said again with the same composure. "Until we talk, you won't be using it." Before I could respond, another voice joined the call, my mother-in-law, Barbara. "Don't spend a single dollar without asking us," she said, every word laced with the taste of victory. Silence filled the car. I could almost see her standing in my kitchen, arms crossed, wearing that same proud smile she had perfected over the past 3 years. Neither of them had any idea what my reaction would be. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't beg. I just hung up. Then I started the car and drove straight to my bank. 2 hours later, there were 54 missed calls on my phone, and by then everything the two of them thought they controlled had already slipped out of their hands. Until that afternoon, everyone, even my own husband, believed I was the quiet wife who never talked back. To some extent, that was true. For 17 years, I had chosen peace over ego, again and again. I believed marriages survive because someone stays calm in every storm. Most days, that someone was me. Greg and I met in our 20s, when I was finishing my accounting degree in Charlotte, North Carolina. He had just started a small HVAC and plumbing company back then, just a van, a few tools, and confidence far greater than his money. I loved that confidence. He loved my patience. We didn't have much, but together we built a comfortable life. Over the years, his company grew. My career grew too. I became a CPA who helped veterinary clinics manage their finances, prepare taxes, and plan for the long term. My work wasn't flashy, no big job sites, no logo trucks, just spreadsheets, numbers, careful planning, and clients who trusted me with their futures. The income was very good. Very few people knew how good. Greg was one of them. He knew I earned well, he never asked for details, and I never felt the need to compare salaries. To me, marriage wasn't a competition. Money was just a tool with which we built our family's future. Together we raised 2 beautiful children. Chloe was 16, serious and responsible. Marcus was 14, funny enough to make even hard days feel light. Every financial decision I made revolved around these 2 kids. College funds, emergency savings, insurance, retirement. If I could lift any future burden off their shoulders, I considered my work worthwhile. For years, Greg valued that. Then, slowly, everything began to change. The change didn't start with money. It started with grief. 3 years ago, Greg's father, Walter, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. His mother, Barbara, was suddenly left alone. Neither of us wanted her to be alone, so we invited her to live with us. At first, it seemed like the right decision. She was polite, helpful, and grateful. She cooked, folded laundry, picked the kids up from school when our schedule got busy. I genuinely believed we were doing something good. Looking back now, it seems like that was the last calm season of our family. Slowly, Barbara stopped acting like a guest. She became an authority. It started with harmless opinions. "You shouldn't let teenagers sleep so late." "Natalia spends too much on organic groceries." "Why buy name brand detergent?" None of this bothered me much. Everyone has their own opinion. I'd smile and change the subject. Then those opinions became instructions, then rules, then criticism. She questioned birthday gifts, vacation plans, my order at restaurants. One afternoon, she even peeked inside the grocery bags before I could unload them from my car. $25 for coffee beans? She asked. I laughed. That lasts almost a month. She shook her head. That's exactly how people waste money. I thought, I bought this with my own salary. What business is it of hers? Still, I let it go. Peace seemed easier than conflict. Unfortunately, peace teaches controlling people that you'll tolerate even more. A few months later, Greg suggested we simplify our finances. "Let's put everything into one household budget," he said. It seemed reasonable. Married couples do that every day. So I agreed. What I didn't notice was that whenever we talked about money, Barbara would be sitting nearby. Sometimes she didn't even pretend to just be listening. Eventually, she started answering questions that were asked of me. If you ask me, a wife doesn't need her own spending money. The first time I laughed. She wasn't joking. Greg maybe didn't notice, or maybe he chose to ignore it. Whenever I told him privately that his mother was interfering too much, his answer was always the same. She's old-fashioned. She means well. Just ignore it. Ignoring it became harder. One evening I bought a dress for Chloe's junior homecoming dance. Nothing particularly expensive, just a beautiful purple dress she had been eyeing for weeks while saving her birthday money. When Barbara saw the receipt, her face tightened. You spent that much money? Chloe quietly went upstairs. I answered calmly, she deserves it. Barbara looked straight at Greg. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Instead of defending me, Greg sighed. Maybe Mom's right. That hurt me more than the dress itself. Not because of the dress, but because my husband had stopped seeing me as his partner. Slowly, he had started looking at me through someone else's eyes. Still, I never stopped contributing. Every month, I quietly handled our taxes, adjusted retirement accounts, reviewed insurance policies, grew emergency savings. When Greg's business slowed down, I moved money around so payroll never stopped. He never asked how I managed it. He just assumed everything sorted itself out on its own. Sometimes the people who benefit most from your sacrifices notice them the least. Then came the purchase that changed everything. I bought a laptop for Marcus. His old laptop had died in the middle of a school project. I didn't think twice. I researched prices, found a sale, used the family card. A completely ordinary purchase. But Barbara saw the transaction notification before Greg did. By the time he called me that afternoon, the two of them had already decided I needed to be taught a lesson. They genuinely believed that blocking a card would remind me who made the decisions. What they failed to understand was that the card was not the foundation of our family's financial security. I was. And as I parked outside my bank that afternoon, I realized something else. For 17 years, I had secured everyone else's future. It was finally time to secure my own. When people hear stories like mine, they often assume controlling behavior appears overnight. It doesn't, at least not in my marriage. It came as one small compromise at a time. Each one seemed too small to fight over. Each one was easier to forgive than to confront. By the time I realized how much had changed, I struggled to recognize the marriage Greg and I had built together. The first morning Barbara came to our home, she was humming an old song while making pancakes in my kitchen. She smiled when I walked in. I thought I'd make breakfast so you could sleep a little longer. I hugged her. You didn't have to do this. I know, she said. I wanted to. At that time, I was genuinely happy to have her close. She adored her grandchildren. She told wonderful stories about Greg's childhood. She remembered birthdays. Every Thanksgiving, she baked pie from scratch. If someone had told me then that this woman would one day push her son to take control of my finances, I would have laughed. Life rarely announces the moment everything starts to change. It just keeps moving while the changes quietly pile up. About 6 months after Barbara moved in, I noticed her asking odd questions. How much does your office pay these days? Pretty well. More than Greg. I smiled politely. We both earn well. She didn't like that answer. She wanted numbers, comparisons, a winner. I never gave her one. Money had never been a competition in my marriage, at least not until she arrived. One Saturday afternoon, Greg came home exhausted from a job site. His HVAC company had landed several commercial remodeling contracts, and he'd been working almost every weekend. I poured him iced tea as he sat at the kitchen table. Before he could take a single sip, Barbara spoke up. Natalia bought another expensive candle. Greg looked confused. Which candle? The one in the living room. He shrugged. If she likes it. It was $35, she said, looking at me. You spent $35 on a candle? I laughed. It was actually $32. He smiled and said, still seems like a lot. It lasts about 6 months. This should have ended here. But Barbara quietly added, this is exactly how people never build wealth. I almost laughed again. If only she knew. The irony was unbearable. That one candle cost less than the monthly dividend from an investment account I had built years earlier. But I didn't say that. I had no interest in proving anyone wrong. The The strange thing about financial control is that it rarely starts with big decisions. It starts with questions. Do we really need this? Can we wait? Did you compare prices? Eventually, questions become expectations, then permissions. One evening, I stopped at the grocery store on my way home from work. The total came to about $280. Food wasn't cheap anymore. Neither were paper towels, laundry detergent, or the snacks two growing teenagers could devour in a single weekend. As I was setting the groceries on the counter, Barbara started pulling things out of the bags. She picked up a package of fresh salmon. This wasn't on sale. No. You also bought fresh berries. Yes. And imported cheese? I smiled. The kids love it. She sighed dramatically. When I raised my family, we learned the difference between need and want. Before I could respond, Greg walked in. Without hearing the conversation, he asked, "Everything okay?" Barbara answered on my behalf. "We're just talking about the budget." Greg looked at the groceries. "Maybe Mom's right. We could cut back a little." I looked at him. On food. He avoided my eyes. "I'm just saying, she has experience." Experience? That word became his shield. Whenever Barbara criticized me, he called it experience. Whenever she interfered, he called it advice. Whenever I felt dismissed, he told me not to take it to heart. Eventually, I stopped speaking up, not because I agreed, but because I was tired. Meanwhile, my own work quietly carried on. Most mornings I was at the office before 8. My clients included veterinarians and animal clinics. I loved helping people make sensible financial decisions. Some doctors earned brilliantly but couldn't save anything. Some, despite being financially secure, worried constantly. Money, I had learned long ago, wasn't just arithmetic. It was emotion, fear, pride, security, hope. The irony was that I could fix strangers' financial lives while my own home was slowly going emotionally bankrupt. Around the same time, Greg's company hit a difficult winter. Several commercial projects were delayed due to weather. Payments came in late. Payroll deadlines stayed the same. He came home discouraged every evening. "I don't know how I'm going to cover everything this month." I quietly opened my laptop. "Let's take a look." For 2 hours, we went through the numbers together. I reorganized payment schedules, moved cash flow around, postponed unnecessary purchases, transferred money between accounts. Everything balanced out. He smiled with relief and said, "I never understand how you always figure these things out." I smiled back and said, "It's my job." What I didn't tell him was that I had also transferred money from my personal investment account to keep his business afloat. He hadn't asked. I did it because I believed his success was our success. Marriages don't keep score, so neither did I. The kids noticed more than we did. One evening, Chloe knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom?" "Yes." "Grandma doesn't really like you much, does she?" The question caught me off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "She only complains about the things you buy." I forced a smile. Grown-ups disagree sometimes. She sat down next to me. "I've never heard her complain when Dad buys fishing gear." I laughed softly. "Neither have I." She paused for a moment. "I don't think that's fair." I hugged her. "Life isn't always fair." She looked at me. "But you always treat them so kindly." I kissed the top of her head. "Because kindness tells our story, not theirs." At the time, I fully believed those words. Now, I'm not sure kindness should always look like silence. Sometimes silence just allows disrespect to grow. Then came the conversation that changed everything. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had come home early because a client had canceled. Passing through the garage, I heard voices from the kitchen. Greg and Barbara. Neither of them knew I was already home. "You spoil her too much," Barbara was saying. "I don't." "You do. She spends whatever she wants." Greg sighed. "She works hard." "So what? You're the husband." A long silence followed. Then Barbara said the sentence that echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. "A man who doesn't control the money eventually loses control of his family." I stood frozen in the garage, waiting, praying Greg would laugh. That he'd tell her she was wrong. That he'd tell her marriage isn't about control. Instead, I heard him say quietly, "Maybe you're right." Those 4 words broke something I didn't know could break. Not because he agreed with his mother, but because he had stopped trusting the woman who had stood beside him for 17 years. A week later, Marcus's laptop broke in the middle of a school assignment. I took him to the electronics store after work. We found a reliable model on sale. Nothing extravagant, just exactly what he needed. Without a second thought, I paid with the household credit card. When we walked into the house carrying the box, Barbara's eyes went straight to the receipt peeking out of the shopping bag. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The next afternoon my phone rang, and my husband decided to teach the lesson his mother had spent months pushing him to teach. The parking lot outside the bank looked like any other Tuesday afternoon. Parents hurried by with small children. An elderly couple walked slowly toward the entrance, hand in hand. I turned off the engine and looked at my phone one last time. Still no missed calls, just the memory of Greg's voice. "I've blocked your card," then Barbara's. "Don't spend a single dollar without asking us." I set the phone face down on the seat. For the first time in years, I hadn't come to the bank to solve someone else's financial problem. I had finally come to solve my own. The branch manager, Denise Alvarez, came to greet me before I even reached the office. "Natalia, good to see you." Denise and I had worked together for nearly 10 years, not socially, but professionally. She knew I handled complex financial planning for veterinary clinics, and over the years, she had helped me set up several of my personal accounts. She immediately noticed my face. "Is everything okay?" I smiled politely. "I've had better afternoons." She closed her office door. "How can I help?" I took a slow breath. "I need to separate my finances." She wasn't surprised. Bankers see divorces, business failures, inheritance disputes, family conflicts. She just nodded. "Let's look at everything carefully. No drama, no judgment, just professionalism." Exactly what I needed. Denise pulled up every account linked to my name. Some were joint, some were mine alone, some were from before Greg and I married. I looked at each one carefully. "I want my paycheck to stop going into the joint account." "No problem." "I want to reset my direct deposit." She jotted some notes. "Done." "I also want to stop the automatic transfers coming out of my personal investment account." She looked up. "The monthly transfers." Yes. Those transfers had quietly handled far more than anyone in my house realized. Whenever Greg's business cash flow got tight, I'd move money into the household account. Sometimes a few $1,000s, sometimes considerably more. I never announced it. I never wanted credit. I just wanted stability. Denise processed the request. "The transfers will end today." I nodded. "Thank you." After that came my personal savings account, then the brokerage account, then the trust my late aunt had left me years ago. Greg knew I had received an inheritance. What he didn't know was that instead of spending most of it, I had invested nearly all of it. The investments grew steadily over the years, not by luck, but by patience. Every dividend, every bit of interest, every reinvestment, slowly, quietly, the way real wealth often grows. I want these accounts completely separated from household activity. Denise completed the paperwork. "Done." She turned the monitor toward me. "There are also some guarantees tied to Greg's business credit lines." I wasn't surprised. Years ago, when his company was still growing, I had agreed to be an additional financial guarantor because my income and assets strengthened the applications. At the time it seemed perfectly fine. We were partners. Today it felt different. I want to remove myself wherever legally possible. Denise nodded thoughtfully. Some agreements allow immediate withdrawal after review. Some will require alternative paperwork. Understood. She handed me several forms. I signed each one carefully, not out of anger, not emotionally, just carefully. Each signature represented something far bigger than money. A boundary I should have drawn years ago. Denise paused. "Do you mind if I ask?" I smiled. "Ask. Is this heading toward a divorce?" I looked at my wedding ring. For 17 years I had worn it without ever thinking of taking it off. "I honestly don't know." She nodded gently. "Sometimes separating finances saves a marriage." I looked back at her. "I hope you're right. Because despite everything, I still loved my husband. Love wasn't the problem. Respect was." Nearly 2 hours had passed by the time we finished. Denise handed me a folder with updated account information. Everything that's entirely yours is now entirely free. I thanked her. As I stood to leave, she said something I'll never forget. You've spent your entire career protecting other people's financial futures. She smiled gently. Don't apologize for protecting your own. For some reason, those words nearly brought me to tears. Instead, I just thanked her again. Outside, the afternoon sun felt warmer than before. I sat in my SUV and finally picked up my phone. 23 missed calls, most from Greg, several from Barbara, 2 from home, 1 from Chloe. There was a voicemail notification. I didn't listen to it, not yet. I started the engine. Before I could even pull out of the parking spot, the phone rang again. Greg. I watched it vibrate until it stopped. 5 seconds later, another call, then another, then another. I didn't answer any calls on the drive home. On the way, a text came through. Where are you? A minute later, call me right now. Then another, something's wrong with the business accounts. I kept driving. Another message, Natalia, please answer. Another, payroll isn't processing. Then a message from Barbara, what did you do? I almost laughed. Not at anyone suffering, but because for the first time they were asking the right question. What had I done? Nothing illegal, nothing dishonest, nothing secret. I had simply, quietly, stopped carrying the responsibilities they never even knew were mine. When I got home, Greg's van wasn't in the driveway. Neither was Barbara's car. The house was quiet. Inside, Chloe was doing homework at the kitchen island. She looked up as soon as I walked in. Mom? Hey, sweetheart. She studied my face closely. Are you okay? I will be. She paused for a moment. Dad left in a hurry. I know. He looked scared. That surprised me. Scared wasn't a word my daughter would normally associate with her father. What happened? I don't know. She shrugged. Grandma was saying something about the bank. I smiled gently. Did anyone say anything to you? She shook her head. No. Good. I wasn't about to drag my kids into an adult conflict. They deserved better than that. An hour later, Marcus came home from baseball practice. He immediately sensed the tension. What's going on? Nothing you need to worry about. He didn't look convinced. Before another word could be said, the front door swung open loudly. Greg walked in. His face was paler than I'd ever seen it. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the air conditioning. He wasn't angry. He looked terrified. Natalia. I calmly set my coffee mug down on the counter. Hi. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. Payroll didn't process. I nodded. I know. The operating account. He struggled to finish the sentence. It's short. I know. His breathing grew uneven. The mortgage payment is also on hold. I know. Behind him, Barbara rushed into the kitchen. For the first time since she'd moved in with us, she wasn't smiling. What did you do? She asked. I looked straight at her. I protected what was mine. She opened her mouth to argue. Before she could speak, Greg's phone rang again. He looked at the screen. His accountant. He answered immediately. I watched his confidence drain from his face as he listened. When the call ended, he lowered the phone slowly. His voice was barely above a whisper. They're asking where the monthly transfers went. The room went completely still. For years those transfers had come like clockwork. No one had ever wondered who was funding them until they stopped. My phone buzzed again. I looked down. The number of missed calls had climbed even higher. By bedtime it would reach 54. And my husband was only now beginning to understand that the strongest foundation of our family had never been the business he built. It was the wife he had underestimated. Greg stood in the middle of the kitchen holding his phone as if it had suddenly become very heavy. For several moments no one said anything. Only the hum of the refrigerator could be heard. Finally Barbara broke the silence. You can't just take money away from your family like that. I looked at her calmly. I didn't take anything. She frowned. Then why are the accounts short? Because I stopped putting my money into them. She startled. Your money. I repeated the word slowly, not because she couldn't hear, but because I wasn't sure she'd ever believed it existed. My paycheck, my investments, my personal accounts. Greg looked at me. What are you talking about? I looked into his eyes. You really don't know, do you? His face answered my question before he could. No, he didn't know. Without saying another word, I went upstairs. No one followed right away. When I came back down a few minutes later, I was carrying a large gray file box. It was heavier than it looked. 17 years of paperwork carries considerable weight. I set it down gently on the dining table. Greg looked confused. What is this? Our financial history. I lifted the lid. Inside were neatly organized folders, tax returns, mortgage statements, investment reports, insurance policies, business records, emergency savings summaries, all arranged the same way I organized every client's financial life. I slid the first folder toward him. Open it. He opened it hesitantly. Inside were copies of payroll records from 4 years earlier. Remember that January? I asked. He nodded. It was terrible. You almost missed payroll. I found a way. I shook my head gently. No. I pointed to a highlighted line. I transferred $31,000 from my investment account. His eyebrows rose. What? You didn't find a way. I helped. He looked at the papers. I don't remember this. Because I never told you. I opened another folder. Look at this. He slowly turned the pages. His face went even paler. The IRS? I nodded. The accountant made a filing error. I remember. You thought they waived the penalty. I slid another document toward him. They didn't. His eyes moved across the page, then to another. A copy of a cashier's check from my personal account. You paid this? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to embarrass you. The room fell silent again. Not an angry silence, an uneasy one. The kind that forces people to question everything they thought they knew. Barbara crossed her arms. So what? Married people help each other. I agree, I answered without raising my voice. That's exactly what I did. She snapped, then why are you acting like a victim? I smiled sadly. I'm not. I looked straight at her. I'm acting like someone who has finally stopped being invisible. Greg sat down slowly. His shoulders looked different somehow, smaller, less confident. He picked up another folder. It says here. He stopped reading. His eyes rose to meet mine. You made the down payment on the lake cabin. I nodded. I used part of my inheritance. I thought. I know what I thought. He looked genuinely ashamed. I thought the business had finally started earning enough. It hadn't. He carefully closed the folder. I never knew. No. You never asked. One by one, the documents painted a picture neither Greg nor Barbara had ever seen. Every slow season in the business, every unexpected expense, every unforeseen medical bill, every contribution to college savings, every retirement adjustment, every insurance increase, every investment, every transfer, every sacrifice. I hadn't hidden any of it. The records had always been available. Greg had simply trusted me enough to let me handle everything. Somewhere along the way, that trust quietly turned into duty. Then duty turned into entitlement. The front door opened. Chloe and Marcus walked in together after taking the dog for a walk around the neighborhood. They immediately sensed something was wrong. Dad? Greg looked up quickly. You two don't need to be here. Neither child moved. Chloe looked at the papers scattered across the table. Then she looked at me. Mom, I'm okay. She came and stood beside me. It reminded me of when she was 6 years old. Whenever she sensed I was upset, she'd just stand close enough to hold my hand. Now she didn't hold my hand. She just stood beside me. Some habits never fade. Marcus looked at his father. Is everything okay? Greg opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Finally he whispered, I made a mistake. It wasn't a full apology, not yet. But it was the first honest sentence he had spoken all afternoon. Barbara wasn't ready to give up. She looked at the kids. This is a matter between adults. Chloe surprised everyone. No. Her voice stayed respectful. But it became our matter when you started treating Mom like she can't make her own decisions. The room froze. Barbara looked stunned. You shouldn't talk to your grandmother like that. I wasn't being disrespectful. Chloe swallowed hard. I've watched you criticize Mom almost every day since you moved in. No one interrupted. I thought maybe I was wrong to think that. She looked at her father. But then you started agreeing with Grandma. Greg lowered his eyes. Marcus spoke up next. I remember the laptop. Everyone looked at him. I felt guilty. You shouldn't have felt that way, I said softly. I know. He looked at his father. I thought maybe I shouldn't have asked for it. Greg covered his face with both hands. You should never have felt that way. What? My son's voice broke. I heard Grandma say Mom wasted money. His eyes welled up. I thought buying my laptop got Mom in trouble. The shame on Greg's face was almost unbearable to watch. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I knew he was realizing exactly the right thing. This had never just been about money. Our kids had quietly been carrying an emotional burden they never deserved to see. A few minutes later, Barbara finally spoke again. I was only trying to help. I looked at her. I'm sure that's what you believed. She seemed surprised by my answer. But helping and controlling aren't the same thing. She didn't respond. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe, for the first time, she genuinely didn't know what to say. Greg slowly stood up. He walked over and stood right in front of me. I need to ask you something. Okay. Why did you never tell me any of this? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because I thought we were a team. He frowned. We were. Were we? I asked gently. Or was I quietly cleaning up every financial mess while you believed you were handling everything alone? He couldn't answer. I never wanted credit, I continued. I never wanted praise. I just wanted respect. The tears that had been gathering in his eyes finally spilled over. I'm so sorry. I believed he meant it, but I also knew that genuine apologies don't erase years of behavior. They're only the first step toward change. As evening settled outside the windows, the dining table remained covered in 17 years of truth, no accusations, no revenge, just facts. For the first time since Barbara had moved into our home, every illusion was gone. And without those illusions, we finally had the chance to decide whether our marriage was worth saving. The next morning the house was unusually quiet. Not peaceful, just tired. No TV was playing in the family room. No one argued at breakfast. Even the dog sensed something had changed. Greg barely slept that night. I knew because whenever I woke up, I could hear him pacing downstairs. In 17 years, I had learned to recognize what kind of burden he was carrying just by how he moved through the house. This time, the burden wasn't unpaid bills. It was regret. 17. I left for work a little earlier than usual. I needed spreadsheets, meetings, and familiar routine. As I pulled into the office parking lot, my phone rang. Greg. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Hi. His voice was tired. Can we talk tonight? We've been talking. I mean, really talk. I looked out the windshield for a moment. No yelling. No blame. No interference from your mother. He said almost immediately, I'll make sure of it. For the first time since everything had come apart, I believed him. I'll be home around 6. Thank you. The workday moved slowly. My clients had no idea my marriage was hanging by a thread. I reviewed tax projections, answered emails, met with a veterinarian opening a second clinic, smiled at the right moments, took notes. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, my thoughts kept circling back to one question: can trust really be rebuilt? I had watched clients climb out of bankruptcy. I had watched businesses survive disaster. I had watched families recover after terrible financial mistakes. But rebuilding a marriage requires something numbers can never measure: humility. When I got home, Barbara's car was gone. Greg was sitting alone on the back patio. 2 untouched cups of coffee sat on the table. He stood up as soon as I stepped outside. Thanks for coming. I live here. A faint, embarrassed smile crossed his face. I guess you do. We sat in silence for almost a minute without speaking. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It just felt honest. Finally, he looked at me. I told Mom to stay with my sister for a few days. I nodded. She wasn't happy. I'm sure she wasn't. But she left. He rubbed his hands nervously. I needed to talk to my wife. Those last 2 words caught me off guard. Not because they were unusual, but because I hadn't felt like his partner in a long time. He took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. I waited. Not because I needed a speech, but because I needed sincerity. I've apologized before. You have. But usually just to end the argument. I didn't disagree. This time he looked straight into my eyes. I'm apologizing because I finally understand what I actually did. I stayed silent. You weren't spending my money. No, you were protecting our family. Yes. And I let my mother convince me that protecting meant controlling. His voice broke. I became the man I never wanted to become. There it was, no excuse, just realization. Sometimes real healing begins right there. I want you to understand something, I said quietly. He nodded. When you blocked that card, I paused. I wasn't hurt because I couldn't buy groceries. He listened carefully. I was hurt because my husband thought I needed permission. He lowered his head. I know. No. I shook my head gently. I don't think you did know. I leaned forward. You know what crossed my mind? He whispered, what? After 17 years, this man doesn't know me at all. His eyes filled with tears again. I'm so sorry. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive yourself for this today. He appreciated that answer. Forgiveness should never be demanded. It should be earned. A few minutes later, he asked quietly, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you scream at me yesterday? I smiled faintly. I wanted to. He almost laughed despite his tears. I deserved it. Maybe. I looked out at our backyard. But screaming would only have changed the volume. I looked back at him. Not the lesson. He nodded slowly. I understand now. I hope so. That same evening Barbara called. She asked if she could come over. I almost said no. Then I remembered something my father once told me. If people are willing to admit their mistake, at least give them the chance to speak. An hour later, she walked through the front door carrying a small pie from the neighborhood bakery. Strangely familiar. The week she'd moved in with us, she had brought pies too. This time, though, she looked 10 years older. She sat down quietly across from me at the dining table. For several moments, she couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, she spoke. I owe you an apology. I listened. When Walter passed, she struggled to swallow. Walter was Greg's father. I was terrified. I didn't know who I was without him. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. I was afraid of being left alone. Her voice grew smaller. And I was afraid my son wouldn't need me anymore. No one interrupted. I started giving advice because it made me feel useful. She twisted a tissue in her hands. Then I started believing my opinion mattered more than yours. She looked at me. I convinced myself I was protecting him. I nodded. I know. But I wasn't. Another tear fell down her face. I was driving a wedge between two people who loved each other. She looked at Greg. I'm ashamed of that. For the first time since she'd entered the room, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not pride, not control, just an elderly widow who had let grief turn into fear. Fear became interference. Interference became manipulation. Understanding this didn't erase the damage, but it did explain it. I clasped my hands together. If we're going to move forward, both of them looked at me. Some things need to change. Greg nodded immediately. Anything? No. I smiled gently. Not anything. I spoke carefully. We'll keep a household budget that we both review together. Agreed. We'll both keep our personal accounts. Agreed. No one will need permission to buy reasonable personal things. Yes. Absolutely. And major financial decisions we'll make together, Greg finished. Together. I nodded. And I looked at Barbara. I love you because you're my children's grandmother. Her eyes filled again. But this marriage belongs to Greg and me. She whispered, I understand. You won't make our decisions. I won't. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply accepted the boundary, and that was what convinced me most that she genuinely wanted to change. A week later, Greg surprised me. He handed me the card of a licensed marriage counselor. I already made an appointment. You did? He smiled nervously. I thought rebuilding trust deserved professional help. I laughed softly. That might be the smartest financial decision you've made all year. For the first time in several days, we both laughed. Not because everything was fixed, but because hope had quietly returned. Hope doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with one honest conversation and two people finally willing to listen. People often assume forgiveness arrives the moment someone says, "I'm sorry." That's not how it works, at least not for me. An apology can open the door. Walking through it takes time. Trust doesn't return because someone promises to change. It returns because they actually do. One ordinary day, one moment at a time. Our first counseling session felt strange. Greg and I sat on opposite ends of a comfortable gray couch while our therapist, Dr. Reynolds, smiled warmly from across the room. "I want to ask you both a question," she said. Greg nodded. "I'd like that too." She looked at me first. "What did you lose?" I answered without thinking. "The feeling of being his partner." Then she looked at Greg. "What did you lose?" He stared at the floor for several seconds. I lost sight of the woman who stood beside me through everything. No answer solved our marriage. But for the first time in years, we were talking about feelings instead of money. That mattered. Because money was never the real issue. Money just exposed the issue that had been quietly growing for years. Over the following months, we changed more than just our bank accounts. Every Sunday evening after dinner, we'd sit at the kitchen table with coffee and review our finances together. Not because anyone needed permission, but because we both deserved transparency. These meetings turned out to be surprisingly easy. We talked about upcoming bills, vacation plans, college savings, home repairs, charitable donations. Sometimes we disagreed. The difference was that we listened before responding. No one kept score. No one tried to win. Some conversations lasted 10 minutes, some an hour. Each one ended with the certainty that we both knew exactly where we stood. I understood something during those evenings. Connection isn't about avoiding disagreements. It's about respect surviving those disagreements. We made one more important decision. We kept a joint account for shared expenses, but we both also kept our own personal checking and savings accounts. Some people might find that less romantic. I disagree. Trust doesn't require giving up independence. It requires respecting each other's responsibility. When I bought new running shoes a few weeks later, I didn't have to think about whether anyone would question it. When Greg surprised himself with a new fishing rod during a holiday sale, I smiled and asked when he was planning to take Marcus to the lake. It was never about the shoes or the fishing rod. It was about breathing freely again within our own marriage. The biggest surprise came from our kids. One Saturday morning, Chloe walked into the kitchen with a notebook. "Will you two help me build a college budget?" I looked at Greg. He looked at me. Then we both laughed. "Of course," we said together. For the next hour, we both talked with the kids about student loans, credit cards, emergency funds, and the importance of spending less than you earn. I didn't hide from them what had happened between Greg and me. I just didn't burden them with every painful detail. Instead, I told them something I wish someone had told me years earlier. The healthiest financial relationship isn't built on who controls the money. It's built on honesty, respect, and shared responsibility. Chloe wrote that sentence down. Months later, I found it taped inside her planner. That small piece of paper meant more than she probably realized. Barbara changed too. Not overnight, but noticeably. After staying with Greg's sister for a few weeks, she asked if the two of us could have lunch together, just the two of us. I agreed. We met at a small diner we'd both always loved. In the middle of the meal, she quietly admitted something. "I started volunteering at the senior center." "Really?" She smiled. "They needed someone to organize the donation records." I laughed. "So now you're doing bookkeeping?" She nodded proudly. "It keeps me busy." More importantly, it gave her something she'd been missing: purpose. She no longer needed to insert herself into our marriage to feel valuable. She had built a life outside of it. She still gave advice occasionally. The only difference was she waited until we asked, and when we said, "We've got it handled," she'd smile and let it go. That small shift changed our relationship more than either of us expected. About a year after the day Greg blocked my credit card, we celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary. Nothing special, just dinner at the small Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary years before. As we finished dessert, Greg reached into his jacket pocket. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd bought jewelry. Instead, he slid a small envelope across the table toward me. Inside was a new credit card. Not because I needed it. My card had worked perfectly fine all year. He smiled and said, "I thought this should be in your wallet." I looked at him. "You know I already have cards." "I know." He reached across the table and gently took my hand. "This one's different." "How?" "It's not about spending." He paused. "It's about trust." I smiled. "You know, I put the card back in the envelope. I never wanted that card." "I know. I wanted my husband to believe I was his equal." He squeezed my hand. "You always were." I was just blind to seeing it. No dramatic applause, no cinematic ending, just two people who had nearly lost each other, choosing one another again. Sometimes people ask if I regret going to the bank that afternoon. My answer is always the same. No, because I didn't go there to punish my husband. I went there to protect my self-respect. The difference between those two matters. Revenge might satisfy your anger for a moment. Self-respect changes the rest of your life. If Greg had never admitted he was wrong, our story might have ended very differently. But he chose accountability over pride, and I chose boundaries over bitterness. Together, those choices gave our marriage a second chance. Today, our grandchildren know us as the grandparents who laugh too much while playing board games and spoil them with homemade cookies. They'll probably never know how close we came to losing everything, and that's okay. Some victories don't need an audience. They just need two people willing to grow. If there's one lesson to take from my story, it's this. Never confuse love with control. Never mistake silence for peace. And never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who held their family together for years without ever needing recognition. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who never needs to raise their voice.